Hello and welcome to In Search of the Crystal Skull, an epic adventure into the world of mediocrity. My name is Aaron.
My name is Patricia.
And today we continue Keanu Reeves Month, but one caveat, unfortunately, with this episode. Now, recently we announced that we were going to do an episode where we're going to put up The Matrix Reloaded against The Matrix Resurrections. Now, unfortunately, Resurrections is still on premium at the minute, and also we can't seem to get a stream of it anywhere. So, unfortunately, we are going to have to do just The Matrix Reloaded alone. But don't worry, everybody, we've actually got another episode planned up coming up next, so we'll let you know about that. But anyway, today's movie for Keanu Reeves Month is going to be The Matrix Reloaded, which is the sequel to The Matrix. It's funny because I never really, after the first movie, I didn't really have much of an interest after that for The Matrix. I never really watched the sequel, before then, but now that I've watched it, I kind of understand why I kind of fell out of love with it, really.
Yeah, I mean, the first movie felt like it was a standalone story. It could be completed. It could just have this one tale of this guy who is living a normal life, but then it turns out it's much more than what he thinks it is. He is chosen to be the one, and then all of a sudden, because it made so much money, because it became a major pop culture staple, because every single movie from the 2000s made references to it, they had to make more of this point. It was like a major cash cow. And to think that this movie almost didn't happen. I mean, there was like a lot of developmental hell between the Wachowskis and then trying to prove it was going to be possible. And then there's the whole allegations about the original source material, The Matrix, was actually a major ripoff between Grant Morrison's comic book series. And then there was a lot of correlations between this movie and Ghost in the Shell, but we're not going to get into that. But yeah, after the major success of The Matrix, which pretty much blew people's minds around the late 90s, in which it combined this cyberpunk mixed with martial arts and anime, and it just blew people's minds. I mean, they had never seen anything at that point in time, and then they were thinking along the lines of, well, this movie did so successful, let's see if we can make a sequel of it. And yeah, it came out around that time in which when there were a lot of sequels to movies that were, just as critically acclaimed as the first movie. There was Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, and then there was various other movies. But yeah, this one seems to be kind of like that case in which maybe one movie was more than enough, because here's the thing. I have not seen Matrix, the third Matrix movie, and have not seen, obviously, Matrix Resurrections. I have not even seen Animatrix either. So
I have seen Animatrix, and Animatrix is actually kind of cool. So
okay, yeah, I've been wanting to see Animatrix because a lot of people say that even though it's kind of 9 short films put together in this anthology series, and basically they compiled it together to kind of tie the stories of the Matrix, I have not seen it, and I feel like I should because I've heard a lot of people talking about it. But yeah, as for the other Matrix movies, I'm like you, Aaron. I haven't seen it outside the first one.
Yeah, well, now we've finally seen it, and so on the story, so we pretty much continue off after what happened in the first movie, pretty much. So,
pretty much.
Neo, Morpheus, and Trinity, basically, they get the ship back home, and apparently now they're getting ready for the Matrix to effectively attack, the human world of. I do apologize. I completely forgot what the world of the human race is. What's it called?
Are you talking about
where they're all hiding out? No, it has a name. I completely forgot what the name is.
Okay.
Can you not remember what it is either? Zion. Is it Zion?
Zion. I think it's Zion, yeah.
Yeah, so basically, an army of Sentinels are tunneling towards Zion, and they will reach the place in 24 hours. Sorry, 72 hours, I should say. And so the captain, basically the commander, wants to keep all the ships in place. However, Morpheus believes that Neo is still the chosen one, and he wants to basically take them to find a glitch within the Matrix that eventually could, provide the solution to the humans, obviously, fighting off the machines and everything. So there's that. So I mean, so the story in The Matrix Reloaded is pretty basic. I mean, I pretty much just outlined in a nutshell basically what it is. Effectively, and but I mean, to be honest, when you go into a Keanu Reeves movie, you know exactly what you're asking for. It's really cool fight scenes and a lot of choreographic fights, effectively. And let me safely say this: they are in plenty of supply. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think that for a lot of people who just see the Matrix face value, it's like, okay, what do people like about the Matrix? Okay, cool fighting scenes, cyberpunk and futuristic stuff, and all that, like, oh, the chosen one stuff. Oh, we got to keep that stuff because Harry Potter and like Lord of the Rings. I mean, the whole fantasy stuff. They always have chosen one stuff. So yeah, we got to have like a character who has a destiny, and he needs to be able to meet up with that destiny. So we need to have those things.
well, that was
I
the
mean,
style at the time. But I mean, to be fair though, like they do actually question whether Neo is actually the chosen one at some point because they don't know if it's just something that's in Morpheus's head and everyone just thinks he's insane, or it's just the fact that yeah. So like it does bring in like a question of like what is Neo's like role in the universe effectively. So I think I mean it does a good job in that respect. However, the one thing I would say is that there's a lot of other movies out there now that does this a lot better. And so there's even
agreed.
TV shows that
And
even do this
also-
better now as well. But I mean, to be fair, Neo, I mean, let's face it, the Matrix Reloaded at this point is like 20 years old. So I mean, like there has been plenty of time for the story of that particular story to evolve over time. But I mean, the Neo story, I mean, for what it was at that time, I think is pretty passable.
Sure, sure. And then we learn later on in the story that when he meets up with the architect, it turns out that he wasn't like originally the one. He was just the sixth iteration of the one. And he actually has a decision on whether he wants to reboot the Matrix from the source and pick, a few people so that they can be able to repopulate, or he can go and save Trinity and causing the Matrix to crash and then everybody dies. So, yeah, I mean, at least there's a choice on the matter as opposed to like, no, you're destined to do this, and if you don't, then there's gonna be severe consequences because there's nobody else in the world that can. So yeah, they play around with this a little bit, and again, like you were saying before, it is commendable that they're able to kind of like question about whether Neo is truly the one. But yeah, I think that, as you were saying before, there have been implements of that better elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, towards the end of the movie, I mean, I do like the idea of like the illusion of choice. Kind of brought into the movie. And let me tell you, the illusion of choice is pretty real, in outside of the Matrix, let alone inside of it. But I mean, I digress. But I mean, the architect basically gives like Neo a choice. Like you can go through this door and like save everybody, or like you can go through the other door and basically save Trinity and basically kill everybody in the process. And gives him that. But I mean, Neo basically just says screw you and basically just goes through the door and saves Trinity and saves everybody else. Effectively,
yeah,
so like,
exactly.
so I mean, like, in a way, he breaks through that thing where no other ones have done in the past. So
yeah, it kind of reminds me of like in how in Avatar: The Last Airbender, when Aang meets up with Guru Pratik, so he can be able to reconnect with the Avatar state, and he has this choice about like letting every worldly possession go, including the love of his life, Katara, or he's never going to go back into the Avatar state at all, and he chooses Katara, and you would think that it's going to be going over to him making the decision, and then it's going to affect him, but then it turns out no, he was actually struck by Azula, and then he cannot go into the Avatar state until a little bit later on. So he had that bit of a decision to make, in which, what is he going to do? Is he going to protect the love of his life, or is he going to be able to use his power so that he can be able to save, millions upon millions of lives and preventing this crazy dictator from taking over the entire world? So yeah, it kind of like follows in that sense.
yeah, I mean, but that follows Aang. I mean, a lot longer. Sorry to keep going about Avatar and the Matrix, but like I mean, Aang also has like another choice towards the end of the show where like he doesn't want to kill Vile Lord Ozai, but he may be forced to do so in order to stop him from being being this maniac. But then obviously he decides to break through that choice and decides like I'm going to take his bending away. So like so he's done that. Actually, he's basically been put in like awful situations multiple times, like of awful choices, but it always comes out smelling like roses, pretty much.
Exactly.
So like, but
yeah.
the Matrix. I mean, like, keep this in mind, we've only seen the Matrix Reloaded and the Matrix at this point. So like, I mean, it's not like we have seen Neo go through these, but probably like not as many times as probably like other characters have been. But to be fair, Neo is a lot older than Aang is, at this point. Both movie wise and both like character wise. So I'm guessing like he Neo has more is either a disadvantage or a bit of an advantage when compared to Avatar Aang. But I mean, at the same time, like in the Matrix does do this story well, but again, as we said before, there's other stories now that are around that actually have done it better. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that the characters are able to kind of like progress from what we saw in the last movie. I mean, we got to see more of Trinity, we got to see more of Morpheus, more of Neo. There's little bits of the former Agent Smith who was defeated in the last movie. We get some new characters who are brought in, such as Neo, played by Jada Pinkett Smith. So yeah, we do get to see like more of how they're able to be really important to the storyline, and they do play it more or less pretty well. I mean, I think that for a lot of people who are, basically like involved in the story of this, I think that they do it pretty well. And again, I think that it's a tough act to follow considering that of how important and how influential the Matrix are. I mean, I think that the Wachowskis knew that when coming into making the sequel.
So I mean, here's the thing though. Like, the Matrix may be cool, but it's kind of weird at the same time. Like, I mean, when Morpheus gives the speech to like all the humans to say that they're going to go fight the Matrix, and then all of a sudden, like, they all start celebrating, and then it kind of like turns into hardcore clubbing. Like, with
Yeah, that is really weird. I know what they were trying to do. Maybe they're trying to do like an interesting spin on like post-apocalyptic dystopian stuff. It's not like 1984 in which Big Brother basically takes everything over and everybody is like really complacent and they don't know anything before Big Brother, or even with like the Fifth Element, in which, like, yeah, it takes place in the future. It's not really that much dystopian, but it's like really weird at points with a lot of the designs and a lot of the characters that they implemented into it.
Yeah,
but
it's
again,
just like all the house music that's kind of like going on, like, all the dun dun, like, and then you got Neo and Trinity like having sex, like, in between of all the scenes, and the beat just kind of like sex, 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 sex. Like, good grief. Like,
yeah.
It's almost softcore porn at this point, when you're watching it. But good grief. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. The one thing that was also kind of noticeable, which, maybe I shouldn't have been noticing this kind of, it's like, like all the in bits, like, that get them into the Matrix, or like, all the, like, connecting things, like, they seems to, like, mold them pretty well into the skin of people from the looks of it, like, from the design. So I think, I don't know if, like, either did some CGI on that, or, like, they actually, like, legitimately, like, put things in people. I don't think they actually did that, but it does look quite convincing. Some of the effects in this movie are very convincing, I have to say.
Yeah.
So that was kind of
it
cool.
makes a lot of sense considering that they were dealing with a lot of work involving with like using a lot of the CGI that was implemented at the time. Remember, this is still 2003, so even though the CGI had been around for at least over a decade at this point, with implementing some effects like with the stuff with Jurassic Park or even the stuff with Mission Impossible. But again, as we mentioned in earlier, that the stuff that they did for the Matrix was like revolutionary. Like, nobody had ever seen anything like this. I mean, they even had to like do some new technology so that they can be able to implement some of the stuff that they did, like the iconic bullet scene. A lot of people remember where it involved with like a virtual camera, but now a lot of the stuff that they were doing at the time, they were using like real photos of buildings as textures, and they're able to get like various things to put in as digital data, and they even like capture things in real time, and then they just implemented into it with optic flow. So a lot of the stuff that they were doing was really complex, especially for its time.
Oh yeah, I mean, like, the Agent Smith fight. Like, by the way, this isn't just like, Agent Smith versus Neo. This is like 100, like maybe 200, 300 Agent Smiths all against Neo in like that one scene. All had to be acted and everything like that. Like, and also there's some behind the scenes stuff of like, them having to like, create like multiple Agent Smiths. Kind of like, it kind of reminds me of, you remember when they did like the Terminator ride, and like, they had to like create like multiple Arnold Schwarzeneggers to like, do all the ride and everything like that, and like, they ended up having to be in a situation where like, well, let's just use Arnold Schwarzenegger for like the cinematic effects that are in the stage show, and then we'll just use the doubles, like, when they're actually on the stage and everything like that. Like, it sort of kind of reminded me of that situation a little bit. And but all of this was pretty. And by the way, I'm sure some people are going to be arguing like, oh well, in The Incredibles, for Pixmix, you mentioned like Universal Man, like how it made everything more legible. Keep this in mind. That was a year after the Matrix. So, like, Warner Brothers had to develop their own, like, style of how to kind of, like, do that before, Pixar came up with Universal Man to, like, create loads and loads of people, like, and, keeping down the, the kind of CPU ability on the visual effects. Like, the technology that went into it and, like, all of that, like, it was extremely difficult to do,
Exactly.
yeah, so...
Yeah, and the fact that they had to be able to film everything digitally and they had to be able to, put together all of the pieces just using a lot of, digital filming. And then they had to put together with a lot of the editing. I mean, that stuff takes a lot of work. It takes like months. Even that fight, as we mentioned before, with like the 100 Agent Smiths versus Neo alone, that took literally months to do. They said it was actually one of the most difficult things that they've ever shot. And it makes a lot of sense considering that, yeah, with all of that shooting that Hugo Weaving had to do to, fight off against Keanu Reeves and, all the multiple takes that they had to do. And then they had to like edit everything down and they had to be able to make sure that there was like no issues, that everything flowed consistently. Again, that is like very commendable work.
Yeah. So one thing I was pretty glad that they did, and remember when like Neo was like doing like all the flying, like all around the world,
Yes.
and thankfully, they said that, oh hey, he's doing the Superman thing, because I'm glad that they actually mentioned that, because I can guarantee you, like they would have easily said, oh that's just Superman. But the fact that they had to acknowledge it as Superman, I'm glad that they did that right off the bat, or else people would be making fun of it. I think. I don't think they would have got the same response. I think if they hadn't mentioned that. I don't think.
Yeah, I guess it does consider that, Superman is also a Warner Brothers property, so I guess they could make that reference. I mean, you have like the Christopher Reeves movie, and even with like the Superman animated series from the 90s was also a Warner Brothers property, so I guess they could make that reference.
Yeah. One thing also I want to mention about, how strange is it that, Jada Pinkett Smith is in this movie? Given the fact that, the original person who was going to do Neo was Will, her husband.
Yeah, that is very ironic.
Yeah, so he turned down Neo to do Wild Wild West, thinking that was going to be like the dominant franchise, and here we are, several years later talking about the Matrix.
And we even talked about this in the discussion of, in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, again, another Warner Brothers property, that Will Smith was considered to be Willy Wonka, but then eventually that went over to Johnny Depp. And it's like, yeah, I mean, we even talked about this before, that Will Smith is notorious for like turning down major roles and then they just become major successes without him. Even still to this day, the Aladdin remake is like his biggest grossing film ever.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm sorry to say, movie studios aren't going to be like, hey, Will, can we just say that we're going to, like, put you in our movie and then not? Just to get it more success, please.
I mean, that's just how it is sometimes. It's like, hey, you have this face that you can be able to draw people in because they recognize it. I mean, it is still to this day a real thing.
Just the rumor of Will Smith being in a movie makes it successful from the looks of it.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, at this point in time, Will Smith was like major. I mean, he had just done Men in Black at the time, and so it made a lot of sense for him to be called in to do The Matrix. And I guess he thought that Wild Wild West was going to be major because Wild Wild West was based off of a well-known Western TV series, I think in the '60s. And it's like, okay, let's see if that's going to be a success, as opposed to like, oh, you have these two directors that nobody really knows about, and it's going to be a martial arts / cyberpunk film influenced by anime and comic books by Grant Morrison. It's like, okay, yeah, that reboot of a well-known TV Western. I'm gonna do that, and yeah, look where that went.
Mm-hmm. So,
anyway, but yeah, as for Jada Pinkett Smith's character, I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, there's the thing, like, the characters I would say are pretty solid.
They are really solid. I will say this, that the casting of this has been like really excellent. I mean, Keanu Reeves, before John Wick came out, this was like his most prolific role ever. Like, if you knew Keanu Reeves, you knew him as Neo in The Matrix.
Mm-hmm. By the way, Randall Kim, he plays the Keymaker in this movie. Which, when
Yes.
they build this whole thing about the keymaker, and it's like, oh, well, who's this guy going to be? And then it turns out, he's just like, it is a key, it's literally a keymaker.
It's literally a keymaker.
He's literally like what you would think when you think keymaker. He's like, he's the guy at the back store who, repairs the shoes and does everything else. And he also makes keys as well. And he's like, oh, yeah, cheers, Randall. Thank you. See you next week.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. It's not like in Ghostbusters, in which you're like, oh, who's the key master and who's the gatekeeper. It's not like two gargoyle creatures. It's like, no, you actually have a guy who literally makes keys. That's actually pretty funny.
Yeah, it could make a good Ghostbusters joke when you really think about it.
Yeah, I mean, again, Warner Brothers.
Yeah, so one thing I liked about one thing was just the slow moments sometimes where they kind of just slow the movie down and they just want to take a look at things. So for example, they have one with Neo, and I do apologize, I can't remember the name of the leader of the humans who's in this, but basically, is it Counselor Hammond? I don't know if it was him or not.
Yeah, I think it
was. Well, yeah. So they go down to the basement level, and I see all the engineering of how Zion works and everything, and he says, "Oh, I don't know how all these bits of work. It's just it's just as long as it all does the final product. That's all that's all I care about. But it is fascinating to look at when it all comes together. And you're taking a bit aback about all this. This is a huge operation to save the human race. Pretty much, and so you can just see it how it all kind of all comes together effectively, and so it's they have those good moments, I think,
and that's one of the things that I really like about the Matrix movies is its world building. You think that from the first time that you see the Matrix, you kind of think oh, okay, it's you see this woman who's kicking a whole bunch of ass, and then you just see this regular guy in an office job. It's okay, where are we going with this? And then you have this guy coming in with glasses saying oh, what you know about is not what you think it is. And then when you finally realize what it actually is, then you're saying, oh wow, now this whole world just opened up to me. And so I'm glad that they were able to continue this in the second movie, where they're able to do some world building, and we're actually able to process about that things are just more than what they seem. And I think that that's really important, because I'm sure that for people who saw the first movie, I'm sure that there were several questions that they wanted to know about. Now, whether that the answers to those questions were satisfactory to them, or they maybe wanted to keep it vague to have people's interpretations go crazy, it's it's I would say that's a bit of a debate. But I think that the stuff that we were some of the answers that we were able to find out, I think it was pretty well done.
Yeah. So let's talk about the fact that the Matrix seems to be glitching at this point. So it's even creating programs that basically want to hurt it. Effectively, all
that's
of that.
Really interesting.
All that I found fascinating, but I mean,
I really found that's really interesting.
Yeah, and it's because when you're having a talk with Neil, it kind of forces you into can you really trust this character given the fact that it's a program? Pretty much, but then obviously it's so you're kind of left hanging the entire time oh, is this going to be a trustworthy character going forward? By the way, we're not seeing the third movie, we're not seeing the fourth one, so we have no idea. So but I'm sure we'll find out soon enough if we ever do watch those other movies. But
well, I mean, here's the thing, that the third movie is not within Crystal Skull territory, but the fourth one is. So
I'm tempted to look at it just out of pure curiosity now.
You know what? Why not? Why not?
I mean, we're not going to review it for Crystal Skull for obvious reasons, but I mean, maybe we'll make you mention it now and just say, oh wait, we saw this and this is what we thought of it, but
or we can even do a casual chat on it, an old school lane.
Yeah, that's the pile of nostalgia that we already have.
Exactly. Our list is already full at this point.
Yeah, and also for the music, I mean, it has the cool house music that also the cool fight music and everything like that. It has all that, but it has that Matrix style effectively that we remember from the first movie. But interesting enough, they bring in people like Rob Zombie and Rage Against the Machine and Marilyn Manson, but yeah,
I don't like Marilyn Manson at all.
Linkin Park's also got some stuff in this as well, and P.O.D.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense because it is the 2000s, and Linkin Park were pretty huge.
Yeah,
at the time.
They were the thing at the time, pretty much. So this is, I mean, the one thing about it is that it is cool in a sense, if you zone your mind back to about 2003, but also in some instances it is a product of its time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the music does feel a bit dated in a lot of ways. You kind of like recognize some of the music, and you're like, oh yeah, it came from like Linkin Park or it came from Rob Zombie and stuff like that. It's not like if you were to watch a science fiction movie that just utilizes its own original soundtrack, you think of it, oh, it doesn't like take place in any time period. It's universally timeless. So yeah, I think that's like a notch for the movie, in which like there are some songs that feel like it belongs in the 2000s. It doesn't feel like it could take place anywhere.
Yeah, and also, how influential the Matrix actually has been. I mean, like, he's parodied in Conker's Bad Fur Day, and also, like, also the music itself as well. Like, there was a lot of Unreal. Remember Unreal Tournament? Like, back at that time when that was super popular, and a lot of the maps that people created and actually did the music for, they all sounded very Matrix-like. Effectively, so like all the music was based off the Matrix, effectively, for like doing some of them, and also they had a Matrix mod as well for Unreal Tournament too. So
Yeah.
so I mean those things did exist. So like in like there's in all like the cameos and like all the parodies and everything like that, like the Matrix culturally has been very influential. And I mean obviously now it's going into like the philosophy of bro territory, which, by the way, how you can make like a philosophical argument based on a movie like The Matrix is pretty I don't understand it. But I mean, I guess some people get some kind of think a bit too hard about the Matrix, I think, sometimes, and then decide to like go on the internet and like talk about it for like hours on end, like it's like some kind of like deep thinking metaphor, like it's some kind of Russian novel. When in actual fact, like when you really look at it from like when you actually watch the movie, it is actually kind of like pretty much like a little bit of story and then a lot of action and then some scenes. Effectively.
Yeah, I mean, like we said before, there have been a lot of dystopian movies out there that take place in the future that is trying to be like very philosophical. I mean, I already mentioned about 1984. Some people can argue Blade Runner is another great example of this, or a lot of Philip K. Dick's novels like Total Recall or The Minority Report, in which it does take place in the future, but it has a lot of interesting philosophical stuff that you can be able to like sink your teeth into
Also,
and debate on for hours on end.
There's V for Vendetta as well, but obviously that was a comic book before it was a movie.
That's a comic book series, but still, I mean, again, takes place in the future. It's dystopian, and there's a lot of social commentary and philosophical discussions that people bring up. So, again, this stuff has been around for quite a while, and there would be other stuff that would come out later on that would be able to push the boundaries of what people can think about. And I think that's really fascinating stuff. And I guess maybe in some parts, The Matrix kind of like helped bring it more into popularity.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say is that the Matrix is not the first, and also won't be the last dystopian end of the world kind of movie, if you will, because obviously climate change and all political events are always in the news, and obviously they're gonna make movies out of them.
Yeah, especially in recent years, in which like we've gotten a lot of films that are more dramatized, where it shows off the repercussions of what happens when there's little care about the environment. There's a lot of TV shows that are like that as well. So even in our own world, where we get to see like trains crashing and a whole bunch of chemicals are leaked into the air and into the water, and it's even questionable if even those places are even safe enough to be even habitable. So yeah, this stuff, no matter what time period that it's going to be at, or no matter where you're located at, this still will be relevant for people.
Yeah, this is still going to be a thing. I think
Yeah.
for movies, I think for the foreseeable future, because people like disaster movies, or people like sci-fi movies like this, even though how scary they can actually be and how real they can potentially be. Not saying that
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, not saying that the Matrix could potentially be real. I mean, well, obviously with artificial intelligence, who knows? But I mean, we've had these movies before. Like the Terminator was obviously the first kind of movie to kind of like do that in some way. And
and then there was also like War of the Worlds, and and like I said before, 1984, which was written back in the 50s. And there's been a lot of like dystopian books and movies and stuff like that. I mean, it's nothing too out of the ordinary. And like I said before, I think that even though that kind of like Blade Runner and Total Recall and all those other ones kind of like were the ones that were like the action mixed with the dystopian stuff, as we mentioned before, I mean, you cannot deny on how massive that The Matrix was when it came out in the 90s.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I think we should give this a score. I think.
Yeah,
So,
let's do it.
I mean, here's the thing about this. Like, solid Keanu Reeves movie, really good supporting cast, and, it's a basic story, I will admit that, but the fight scenes are really good. The music is, obviously a product of its time, but, for the time period, it is, acceptable, I would say. I mean, if it's not an 8, I would say it's a 7.5 at least.
I was actually really close of either giving it a 7.5 or an 8 because, I mean, I would say that it's not as groundbreaking and is not as universal as the first movie, but there are some things that they did do pretty solid on, and I would say I would probably give it a 7.5.
Well, I say, how would we do this? 7.75 out of 10, shall we say?
Sure, let's do that.
Okay, 7.75 out of 10. We're going to go with that. So.
All right then.
Alright then, so to let you guys know where we're going to go with Keanu Reeves Month, the next episode we're going to go into is SpongeBob SquarePants Sponge on the Run. So, yeah.
Well, considering that even still to this day, our discussion on the two SpongeBob movies have been the highest in terms of views on YouTube and on the podcast feed, and considering that it's pretty relevant that there's going to be two SpongeBob movies coming out in 2024 and 2025, I think that it's no better time than to look back on the third SpongeBob movie.
Yeah, and I'm sure we're not going to regret our decision to abandon, a really good movie franchise for something that has disappointed us in the past, right?
No, not at all. I think that we're going to get into quite a ride. I mean, it's SpongeBob. He's never let us down. Right?
Right?